So for this panel session, please help me welcome John Kerr, Head of Global Mobility at Pinsent Masons, and Linda Bekoe, CEO at About Partners. Moderating the session is Tom Fleming, Director of Client Development at AltoVita.
Yeah, that's working. Super. Right, well, thank you, everybody. I think one thing that's actually been left off for Linda, which is actually particularly important for this panel, is your role as the GPTA chair for inclusion and culture as well, which is actually a point we're going to kind of start with. So kind of starting from the start with DE&I, which I know was probably a hotter topic a few years ago. We've kind of been now potentially overtaken with cost savings and AI and eco-stats as we've demonstrated, but it is still no less important. And obviously we have a lot of product features that we're obviously very proud of, but ultimately, as someone made the point in one of the product demos, the focus is on the employee experience, and that's ultimately what DE&I is about. So, Lynn, I'm going to kind of start with you, if that's okay. What does DE&I mean for you in your role, and then do you kind of have any positive examples that you can kind of share with us about it as well?
Definitely. So my name's Linda, as Tom said, and I'm CEO of About Partners. That's my day job. But what I also do is I'm the chair for inclusion and culture. And that's a recently appointed from October last year. And one of the key things that when I started this role was to look at the D&I landscape. And GBTA is very heavily focused in the US, and there's a lot of DE&I fatigue. So for me as an individual, and I think, I have about 20 people on the committee, we just felt that every time you mention the word DE&I, it can be positive or negative, depending on how the person feels or really in regards to their experiences. So one of the things that we came together as a committee to do was to really change the narrative. So instead of looking at DE&I in terms of the DE&I lens, we would look at it more in terms of inclusion. So inclusion and culture, because at the end of the day, everything that we do should be about including people. And we actually felt that by changing the name, and by having those conversations, it made it just a little bit more palatable as well for organizations to hear inclusion instead of DE&I. So that was one of the reasons why we actually changed the name.
Yeah, it's a very interesting point. I know, John, for you, obviously leading a mobility program at Pinsent Masons is obviously kind of part of your, I guess, day-to-day, really. So again, do you want to give us an example of, I guess, how it kind of impacts the program at Pinsent Masons?
Absolutely, and I'm sure people back in the office won't mind me sharing this with you. John Kerr, Head of Global Mobility at Pinsent Masons. We are an international law firm of about 4,000 people. And if you were to wind the clock back, let's say even 5 years, I don't think anybody would be surprised at perhaps how much the opposite of diverse a law firm actually would have been. So very much Oxbridge types, everyone has the same brogues on, same suits, etc. And I think that was a real wake-up call for Pinsent Masons in that encouraging a much more inclusive environment and actually taking direct steps to create that would differentiate us in the market. So in my Head of Global Mobility role, which I've held for the last 3 years now, that has really filtered down into how we look at designing and recalibrating our program. So very much when someone picks up one of our policies that might be interested in a short-term deployment somewhere, we very much want them to feel like it's possible for them and that they're not deselecting themselves at that shop front point.
Yeah. Super, and you kind of mentioned it's progressed over the last couple of years, particularly in your company specifically, but I suppose question open to both of you is how have you seen it progress? And I guess kind of bring it back to accommodation, what have then been the positive impacts on the accommodation programs that you've both experienced?
I think from my perspective, and I'm just talking from a GBTA perspective, one thing that this journey has taught me is that, throughout all the different regions that I've had the opportunity to visit, every region is different. And from an accommodation perspective, when we are relocating people, it's important for us to understand their culture. And I think, I think we've mentioned here, and I think the stats that I'll go away with is that moving is the second less stress than divorce. That's what I've learned from today. But I think it's the stress associated with it. And I think when you look at the whole inclusion piece, that is where you need to look at how best you can help people. And I think we're coming up to some stats which I really would like to share. And I found some of these stats really shocking, because if you look at the employee landscape at the moment, 70% of employees do not disclose that they have any disabilities. Now, the question that we should be asking ourselves is, why do they not feel the need to tell us? Does it mean that we haven't created the right environment? Does it mean that they don't feel confident? Does it mean that they're going to be judged? So that's a question that I think that is important for us to ask ourselves as accommodation providers. But more importantly, how can we make it easier so that they filter that information to us so that we can make their lives just a little bit easier throughout that whole journey? And I think another part, or another stat that I like to share as well, thank you very much, Tom, is if you look at, one thing that I've found is that in the inclusion journey, it's important sometimes to let the leadership understand the financial aspects. Whilst it's a morally good thing to do, also financially, looking at somebody that should be included is something that is so important. So if you're looking at the Purple Pound, for example, which has got to do with accessibility and disabilities, in terms of the UK, that's worth 275 billion. So that's something that I think that, as accommodation providers and as leaders, we need to look at, because this is a market that you can easily tap into, but it's important that you have the right policies in place. It's important that you have the right partners. One thing I love about today is, really hearing about the various partnerships that I think AltoVita has created. And that's a way that I think, mobility managers can really leverage on that. But you need to have the right partners that will give you the opportunity to make sure that everybody in your organization is included in that journey. And you'll hear me use the word included a lot, because I think that that's what DE&I is about. It needs to be inclusion.
Yeah, and you touched on a point, actually, of a question that we were going to come up to, which is about what questions you can ask, I guess, of yourselves, but also what questions you need to ask your employees that you are supporting, your travellers that you're supporting, to, I guess, get the information out of them so that you can actually proactively support. And John, I'm going to come to you now on that point. Is like, how does your programme, I guess, get that information to make the employee feel included and not feel, I suppose, that they almost have to stand out from the crowd to have their needs met?
So we operate what I would describe as an embassy model in the global mobility team. And what I mean by that is, when someone may be interested in a potential deployment abroad, so that might be short-term project assignment right up to a permanent relocation, we really sit them down and almost establish that safe space with them right from the beginning. So it very much focuses on how can we establish that rapport with them and build that up with them. That could be maybe 2 to 3 months before they sign on the dotted line. And I think it's very important for us as the mobility team to not necessarily take sides. So we're not there just solely for the business. We're there to facilitate getting the right person into the right place at the right time. And actually, that right person sometimes is the person you want to come forward, not necessarily the person who would be the second choice candidate.
Yeah, and I think that I guess talent search is probably actually quite relevant to the point we've got up on screen, and how it can actually really impact the bottom line for the business. I guess both positive and negative, where you potentially get it wrong, but equally where you get it right, it then makes that smooth. I think there was a point made by Vivi about the percentage of relocations that don't work, which ultimately we're all here to get that number down. So in terms of, I guess, your supply chain, and I guess in particular your kind of accommodation providers, how do you, I guess, monitor and track the compliance with the D&I policies that you guys have got in place? I guess I'll go to you, John, first.
Absolutely.
Do you want to start? Yeah.
I'm very happy to start. So, from a procurement process, when we actually go out to look for, be it accommodation or anything like that, we very much make sure that we share as much about Pinsent Masons as an organisation as possible. So what are the values that we expect our people to adhere to? And naturally, we want our suppliers and potential suppliers to reflect those. So that is measured very much at the beginning of any type of sourcing process. But then throughout that, when it would come to contracting or anything, we establish KPIs with them around not just financial measures, but around what are they doing to actively progress within their own organisations. Those are reviewed when we have any client service meetings, but at a minimum we do it twice per year. And, you know, people have reported to us that they find that very useful because it keeps them in a position where they can keep the momentum up.
Yeah, and then Linda, coming to you, this is a point I think you raised during our kind of pre-discussions about where the responsibility kind of lies in that. I mean, we're all kind of part of a supply chain in one phase or another. Yeah, so where do you, I suppose, feel where the kind of end responsibility lies, or is it a bit of a split thing?
I think it's a bit of a split thing, because obviously some of it lies with HR, but then some of it also lies with us. And I think that when we're looking at relocating people, this is where, for me, the cultural aspect comes into it as well. Because if we're talking about alleviating that stress from people, just by looking for something that is more local, and providing it, you know, as a welcome basket or something. I think I was speaking to another company, and they were relocating someone from India, for example. What are you doing with the slides?
Trying to get the, there we go, that's
Okay. Okay, cool.
This is why the slide is up here now, to give some context as to why we've got muffins and croissants up.
No problem. So what I found interesting was that they were relocating someone from India to the US, and what they tried to do was they tried to find a location that you know, somewhere that they could, number one, find halal meat, but they also had mosque and things there. So it's about us asking the right questions, because if we can ask these questions, we can make things a little bit easier for them through that transition. And, you know, just having the little comforts from home, I think, is something that will surprise and delight our customers. And if we are talking about the whole customer experience, there's nothing like, you know, walking into an apartment that you know you've been, whether you're happy that you're here or not, but seeing something from home will make you feel they have actually really thought about me, and it'll make you feel it's a little bit more personalized. And interestingly, from a hotel perspective, we always like to give a bottle of wine, and that might not be always the best thing to do, because you need to ask the question that, you know, first of all, do you drink? But secondly, you know, people would like other things as well. So I think that if we can get that data from the beginning, and I think our industry, we love data. So let's do something with that data that we're collecting about the person and make them feel a little bit more personalized.
Wouldn't it be wonderful if there was a tool where you could select such amenities when you're looking at
I'm sure you'll be working on that.
Well, I guess over to you, John, then. Any maybe examples you can give where this has kind of come up, maybe either, I guess, positive or negative for a particular employee, maybe?
So I think one thing that it's really dawned on us recently is that the workforce really is so multifaceted now. So from a relocation point of view, we've got to remember that it's not necessarily just the person that's on your payroll that we need to be worried about. So those people and family units have changed so much. So people may be relocating on their own, but they may have a family that they're leaving at home. And we had a great success, and we were very fortunate to be able to do this, where we had one individual who was relocating on his own to take up a posting to the Middle East for a couple of years. He'd separated from his other half, but he did have custody arrangements for the kids at certain intervals in the year. And of course, with the business head on, you think, well, we need to find accommodation that's for him at the end of the day, so 1 bedroom should be enough. But what do we do about that period of time when the kids are coming to visit? And fortunately, we were able to source a particular property that allowed us to have interconnecting rooms. So provided that we gave them the notice, we were able to facilitate that so that we could almost bolt on that additional unit for the period of time that the kids were there. So I think that was a real success. And had we not been inquisitive and looked beyond just the person who was moving in the first instance, we might not have picked that up.
Yeah, and I guess there needs to be a balance between the individual, I guess, and of course the company, I guess, objectives and I guess structure and potential restrictions within whatever policy you have in place. So I guess also changing tact a little bit, again, coming back, you've mentioned about obviously the employee and their individual requirements and getting that data from them. Once you have that data, how does that then kind of feed back or impact your inclusion, diversity kind of programs? I guess, Linda, we'll start with you on that one. Yeah. How do you feel it should impact it, I suppose?
I think one thing that I always like people to think about is that when you are doing a program, you need to think about when you're putting the policies in place, who are you excluding? Because inclusion should be part of what you do every single day. And by collecting that data, you need to utilize it. But more importantly, you need to let the person know why you're collecting that data. Because I think recently, I think it was last year at GBTA, where they asked the question, how can we make your travel experience a little bit better? And they left that open-ended question. So in terms from a data security aspect or data breaching, it was left up to the traveller to give you that information as to how you can make their experience better. Obviously, if you don't have the data, then you can't do it. But I think that it's about asking those open-ended questions and maybe not necessarily going through the tick box. And then sometimes, training our customer service agencies or directors to just ask a little bit more probing questions, but make people feel uncomfortable. I think there's a big thing now about having an accessibility call desk. Whether you agree or not agree, I've been talking to quite a few people and not everybody's using that desk, because why do I have to call to speak to somebody specifically about my needs when everybody should be trained about my needs anyway, or at least be able to help me? So it's just something that you need to think about, is that let's do things to make people feel included, and let's take away the labels so that they will feel that they're part of the organisation or part of the journey.
And then, so, John, I guess, how have you kind of managed that even in your current company or the past one? And have you ever had maybe either a situation or requirement that then has maybe impacted the policy you kind of currently have in place?
So one thing, and we're currently going through quite a big refresh of our policy suite at the moment to cater to that very point you made, Linda, around it should be inclusive at the shop front. From our point of view, what we've really found is that there's less value in someone like me standing up and preaching about this in the organisation. The voice of the people that have this lived experience has proven so powerful for us. So we have recently started an assignment postcard initiative where we actually get our current assignees or individuals who have recently come back from assignment to do a piece to camera talking about the experience that they've had. And yes, we will give them some guideline questions, but it has been remarkable the number of people who have offered up more about themselves that maybe you wouldn't see on the face of it, and we talked about how things have been put in place to handle their accessibility needs more appropriately. But at the same time, there's also other things coming up that are maybe outside of the normal way that we would think of inclusion. So one of the big requests I get at the moment, believe it or not, is there access to paddle courts in the location where I'm going to? So it's very much like people wanting to think not just about they're going there for work, but they need this to be a home from home that matches their lifestyle as much as possible.
Okay, so Olga added paddle boards to our our filters. So is there, I guess, maybe anything, if you had like a magic wand, let's say, to maybe either add something to a policy or make or existing feature of the policy actually run at 100% effectiveness? Is there kind of one thing that you think that is almost the most important thing to get right or get included? And Linda, we'll start with you on that one.
Oh, one thing. Okay, that's hard. I think for me it would be when you're designing your policy, I think I said this earlier, think about who you are excluding, and having those conversations with your travellers to see if your policy, I think Carol always says this, is fit for purpose. But please think about who you are excluding when you're putting anything in place.
And then, John, I guess for you, actually, because you're already going through this process, I know you mentioned the postcard initiative. Is there anything else that you would, said if you could kind of click your fingers, would be perfect almost within that policy?
So we're debating a lot about this at the moment in terms of how do we, right from the get-go, when someone thinks about relocating, is how do we get that paragraph right at the beginning that says we are open for business regardless of who you are, and that's something where we are mindful that there are particular countries where it may be difficult to get a dependent visa, for example, for your other half to come. But for me, it's the what can we do in mobility to always have the backup plan in that regard, so that we can still facilitate something for that individual if they are indeed the right person, and it's right for the business.
Yeah, I think we've obviously got a lot of kind of travel managers, people working with global mobility on both sides of the fence here. Is there anything, a particular piece of advice? Obviously, you both have quite a lot of experience in this field. Or, particular advice to bear in mind for someone either looking to revamp a policy, put something in kind of new from scratch?
I think for me, we've talked a lot about partnership and collaboration, and I always think that sometimes if people do things in silos, you miss certain tricks. So it's always about making sure that you're constantly speaking to your suppliers. But from a supplier perspective, I think that I also need to educate myself so that I come to you with solutions. So I think it's about partnership and collaboration has to be at the core of everything we do.
So suppliers have really got to buy into this as well. And John, have you kind of had positive experiences with that, again, either of the last couple of companies?
So in my previous firm and with this one, what we find really helpful is to have just the ongoing dialogue, even on a 6-weekly basis with the suppliers that we are using. And I think from an accommodation point of view in particular, the team always checks in with the people the next day after they've arrived to make sure it does feel like that home from home. And then there's a feedback loop that goes back through to square it off.
Sure, and then I guess, obviously, look, we've all stayed in hotels and service apartments in our time. Is there any kind of personal experiences where you've gone, do you know what, actually, this could have been improved, or like actually it would have been nice if someone had asked me this, or this had been flagged in the booking process? Like we've all kind of lived that. It's not just about managing employees, but I guess it's also important to take those learnings in as well, right? As we're dealing with this. So I guess Linda, obviously, I know you speak to a lot of people with your GBTA role about this. Are there any, I guess, key highlights you could share with the group?
I think one thing that frustrates me a lot from a hotel aspect is that we talk about personalization, and if you look at, how other industries do it, they can make things so much more personalized. I think the hotels, and sometimes, our industry, we're missing a trick because it doesn't take a lot to make someone want to come back. I was in the US recently, and I'll go back to that hotel purely because I could log into Netflix and watch what I wanted to do. Plus, I could also download all the American movies, but that's beside the point. So for me, that was really important. And then also, secondly, sometimes we collect data, and there's some hotels that I go to all the time, and that's why I was smiling. And every time you go, it's the same thing. Can I have your passport details? Can I have this? Can I have no welcome back? And I think that if nothing else, our CRM should be able to say how many times I've been to that hotel. So there's a lot we can do around personalization.
Okay, so you would say actually that the DE&I and kind of inclusion piece, almost flows into the convenience and ease and personalisation side, as well. It's not just about if you have a wheelchair or particular dietary requirements and things. Okay, interesting. I guess, John, is that something you've experienced as well?
So I'm a sucker for a handwritten letter. So I really like a welcome back, Mr. Kerr, if I return to the same hotel, because like you're saying, Linda, it demonstrates that they actually are aware that it's not your first visit. And for me, I think, it's not that I feel like a celebrity or anything when that happens, but it's nice to know that I am appreciated to an extent rather than just being another guest name on the roster for that day.
You 100% are a celebrity, John. Okay, so I think we're coming to the end of our session. I know obviously we want to have a look at Alto 360 as well. I guess final kind of key takeaways from the group, and obviously if anyone has any questions, do raise your hand as well. But yeah, final key takeaways from the session. If there's maybe 1 or 2 points, you'd be like, if you're going to think about nothing else after this, these are the 2.
I think one thing that I'll always say about the inclusion journey is that it takes time and we've come a long way, but there's still a lot that needs to be done. And, by having conversations like this and putting it out there, but we need to talk less and do more.
That's it. If any of you are perhaps contemplating or in the middle of policy review, whether you're a mobility manager or a travel manager, don't be afraid to go out and seek those opinions that might be juxtaposed to your own, because if you've got the 360 view on things, you're more likely to land in the right place.
And then finally, are there any kind of questions for either the panel? Yes, Carol.
Hi, I'm Carol from Fidelity. This is a question for Linda. She's probably thinking, oh no.
Got it.
You changed the name of the committee to Culture and Inclusion, and you've talked about inclusion a lot. And, the name of your company is about partners. So that tells us that it's all about partnership and working with the hotels or the accommodation companies representing them, as well as your clients. You also talked about DEI fatigue. So with that in mind, in terms of today, and I know you said that a lot needs to be done, would you say that you're still having to bring it to the table when you have discussions with partners, or is it up there as a key topic in the same way that sustainability is?
It's definitely not up there. I think it's something that we still need to talk about. We talk about sustainability so much, but I think that the core of everything we do is about our people. So the way I look at it is that, is sustainability more important than our people? I don't think so. So it's something that we need to really, I have to constantly remind people in terms of what they're doing from an inclusion perspective. And one thing that I will touch on, which I forgot to say, was that inclusion means different things in every other country. So one thing that we've done in terms of GBTA is that we've set up different subcommittees. So we've got a different inclusion and culture committee in Asia because their needs is completely different. We've also got a different inclusion and culture committee in Africa as well, because all their needs are different. So we shouldn't put everyone in the same pool because their needs are definitely different. But Carol, to your question, we do have to still bring it to the table.
Yeah, we've got one at the back.
Hi, it's Sam from PwC. Linda, one of the challenges you've got with data is GDPR and being able to, from a properties point of view, retain that data. So things like dietary requirements, when they relate to any religious belief, are not allowed to be held. What advice would you give to operators on that? Because obviously if someone wants halal food, you can't actually ask for that information and you can't hold that information. So how do you get around it?
I think for me, one of the key things is leaving that open box for them to render that information, because if they were to give you that information and it's not just a ticking box, it would make it a little bit easier in that sense. Did I answer your question or no?
Yes and no, because you can't actually retain that data. So, and it's also and I'm just thinking it from an apartment's perspective, because you want to know that information, but I know you can't actually hand over that information as such with that. So,
Would you say that information is on property? Because from a hotel aspect, when I remember my days, is that we had a customer profile that we could go into. It's just that you can't transfer the data.
yeah, under GDPR now, you can't keep that data. It has to be destroyed because of it relates. It's a certain level of data that relates to a religion, almost, or a belief. So you can't actually retain that data with it. So that's the challenge that all of us have, because I have it from a meetings and events perspective as well. We're trying to hand that data across to hotels when it comes to dietary requirements.
So is it a case of kind of giving them the option to share that each
data.
time?
Yeah, I have been. There's a gentleman that I've been talking to that says that people can hold the data on their phone, and they can then decide to share it with the establishment if they want to, pre-arrival. So I know that there's tools that are out there that are looking at this.
And I think that just about brings us to time. So if you could give our two celebrities a round of applause.